Hey everyone, welcome back to our movie news. Last night I saw Rebel Moon Part 2 The Scargiver, and today I will be sharing my full, honest, spoiler-free thoughts on the movie. Now I said before going into this film that I thought just from the trailers that this movie felt more like Rebel Moon, and I think I was right. This felt more like what I had expected from a Rebel Moon movie, and that in itself is a pro and a con. Now firstly, let's talk about the pros. Now straight off the bat, I will say I think this movie is the better of the two. Part 1 was really a setup for this film, and after seeing Part 2, I'm even more grateful for what Part 1 did, as it really helped this movie be the movie it needed to be, if that makes sense. Because this movie flew by, and I know it's only a 2-hour runtime, which is quite short for a Snyder movie, but it's really important that the movie goes by quickly, as that shows how absorbed I was into the film. From minute 1 right to the end of the film, I was gripped. Normally when I'm watching a movie I'm finding boring or dull, I will check my watch at least once to see how long is left. But with The Scargiver, I hardly took my eyes off the screen, let alone checking my watch. So that's a real compliment to the movie. Now what I also really liked in this film, and actually preferred over the first film, was the actors' performances. Our heroes really had more time on screen, so we got to know them more, and with this film involving an intense battle, it really tested their acting abilities. And they all did really well with it. My standouts were Kora, Tarak, and General Titus. Not only with the character development of all three, but the actors' performances themselves. I think they were tested the most, and they really succeeded with it. Now, surprisingly, my favourite section of the movie was actually the first act, which was the quietest moment of the film. It was where we spent the most time with the characters, and that is where I grew emotional attachment to every single one of them. It was really nice just to see the group talking with one another and seeing them mix with the villagers, and one of my highlights from the film was a specific scene early on with Sam. She had this beautiful moment that I won't spoil, but I just really loved it, and it made me grow closer to her as a character. We also got to see the villagers working together, and this was where Snyder's visuals really flourished. Now I know some of you hate slow-mo, but what do you expect from a Zack Snyder movie? There was a lot of slow motion in this film, but I loved it. I've always loved slow motion, and Zack is one of the best at it. There were so many beautiful shots, whether it be them cutting down wheat or high explosions going off. Zack just knows how to make slow motion look great, and personally it made me like the film more. There are some incredible shots in the flashback sequences as well as in the modern day, and it just made the film so much better because it made everything so visually entertaining. But it wasn't all visuals. Another pro for this movie was the story. Now it's very easy to be so focused on the action that the story can be disregarded, but I think this film managed to get a decent balance. It does have its issues, and I will talk about that in a moment, but for the most part, the story is the focus and the action serves the story. It's not just mindless action for the sake of action. It all tends to serve the story in some way. And with that story came some twists and innovative moments that I didn't see coming, and it really enhanced the story from some basic sci-fi battle to a true emotional fight. I really liked the added backstory to all of the main heroes, as it meant we had solid explanations as to why they were there and how they became the people they are. But I was most surprised by Kora's story. I knew what roughly to expect, but it also surprised me quite a lot, and I'm so glad it was like that because, like I said, it meant this wasn't just a basic sci-fi battle. It had twists and turns which kept you on the edge of your seat. What I really think helped Part 2 was the fact they filmed them back to back, and it carries on from where Part 1 ends, so you get this consistent flow and continuity that you wouldn't really get if you filmed them years apart. So that also helped both parts feel like one big continuous story. And I have to say, I am amazed that the budget was only $80 million, because there was a lot of CGI and special effects being used, and it all looked fantastic. I saw the film on the big screen, so if there were any major bad shots, I would have been able to spot them, but there weren't any. movie. So I was very impressed by the CGI, and to move on to the dream lens Snyder used, it actually worked better for this film than Part 1. And I think it might have been because Part 1 had slower shots, so we had more time to look at each shot, whereas here we had a lot of fast action scenes. So the lens didn't bother me as much as it did in Part 1. If anything, this time, because it all takes place on Veldt, the lens complements the village as it's a deserty, hot planet, so the hazy blur on the top and bottom kind of made sense here. Now, moving on to the score, Tom Holkenborg created a very solid score for Part 2. Part 1 had some nice pieces of music, and this film did as well. My highlight of the soundtrack has to be the piece called Quick Hatch, which occurs in the first act of the movie, and it really helped build the momentum for what was to come, and subconsciously got me hyped for the battle ahead. It was a really strong piece of music, and the overall score really helped the pacing of the overall movie. And there's a character that I think will be underrated when people watch this, and that is Nemesis. She may not say too much, but when she does speak, you listen. And she had an interesting journey over the two movies. However, I do feel we should have spent more time with her, because I felt there was more to uncover there, and I wanted to know more about her. And I feel the same way about another character too. Which leads me on to the cons. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough of Jimmy. Now, I'm reading the novelization to Part 1, and there was a lot more of Jimmy in the book that I wish was in the movie of Part 1, but obviously that will be in the director's cut. And in Part 2, I was hoping we saw more of him as well. But unfortunately, he was only really there for the action like the trailers had suggested. The small moments we had with him before the battle were really nice, and it did make me closer to him, but I think he is such a fascinating and cool character, and to not spend more time with him was a wasted opportunity. With the runtime only being 2 hours, I think most would have been completely fine if we spent 5 or 10 minutes more with Jimmy and getting to know him more. Hopefully the director's cut spends more time with him, but I'm here to judge the movie I saw last night, and I do wish we spent more time with him, which in a way is a compliment because it means I really like his character and I have a desire to see more, and the desire to see more shows that I enjoyed the movie. Unfortunately, another con was that I felt the battle was a bit of an information overload at times. Normally, you can see some form of clear defined separation between Acts 1, 2 and 3, but because, as Zack described, this movie was really the end of Act 2 and the beginning of Act 3 of the overall Rebel Moon story, I felt at moments it was difficult to take in the battle as it went on for such a long time. I think if the battle was a bit more refined and we had a bit more of an Act 1 and 2, then the movie would have flowed a bit better and would have let me be less smacked in the face with action. Now, don't get me wrong, the action was epic and really entertaining, but from a storytelling aspect, I would have preferred more time with the villagers and the characters' development early on in the first 2 acts, as that would have really helped warrant a large, intense Act 3. But because it was a slower Act 1 and 2, which was kind of only one act in itself, and Act 3 being a large, almost pure action act, it felt like it was a little imbalanced, and like I said, information overload. And my final con is a little bit of a nitpick, but I think the dialogue could have been slightly better. Not for a lot of the time, but in certain moments, it felt a little clunky or robotic. Fortunately, it was on the rare occasion, so nothing too bad, but it's just a little nitpick of mine. Other than that, I have to say I just really enjoyed the film. Like I said earlier, out of the 2 films, Part 2 is definitely the better movie for me. I feel the pacing is better, and the addition of larger scale action really helps build the fear and emotion for our heroes. It's also the more relevant film of the 2, if that makes sense. Part 1 was really just establishing the characters in this universe and how they get together, whereas Part 2 is really the full impact story. I almost think that going forward, they should create shows for these characters before introducing them in movies, as I think that way you can really take your time to flesh out these characters without worrying about the runtime. I would say if they had made Part 1 a series of Kora's journey throughout the universe and then kept Part 2 as a movie but maybe making it a bit longer at the start, then you would have got the best of both worlds, and I would be very interested if they decided to do that in the future. But back to reviewing Part 2. What I also loved about this movie was that you feel the director's vision. It has personality quality, and that's what I love about movies, when you can feel a distinct director's touch on the movie you're watching. And that's what I felt with Rebel Moon Part 2 The Scargiver, which is why I give this movie an 8 out of 10. I really did enjoy this movie, and hopefully you guys do too on April 19th. What I finally want to say is a big thank you to Netflix UK for inviting me along to the UK premiere of the movie. I had an incredible time and I'm so grateful for the help they provided. But I do have 2 stories to tell you guys from last night. So unknown to me at the time, Stas Nair, the actor who plays Tarak in the movie, was sat right behind me whilst the movie was playing. And at the end of the film, as we were all slowly walking out of the cinema, I managed to talk to him for a bit. We talked about our thoughts on the film, and I asked him how it was to be directed by Zack Snyder. And Stas was so kind the whole time I was talking to him. It wasn't like he was just trying to get away and stop talking to me. He was a normal, kind man who was absolutely happy to chat with me and was so grateful when I said he did a great job. He asked for my name, I said Will, and he shook my hand and looked right at me and said, "Thank you so much, Will." Now, that may not sound like much, but to a fan who was really nervous to talk to a celebrity, him hearing me and truly being grateful for what I am saying to him is so kind and something I didn't expect. So Stas, if you are somehow watching this video, thank you so much for that small interaction. And if you ever want to chat on my channel about Rebel Moon, you are more than welcome to. But that's not the only story I have from last night. After the movie, I was invited to the after party, and I went upstairs and Stas Nair was there with his family again, and I managed to get a photo with him. But soon after, it was quite empty and I had to get back soon, otherwise I would miss the trains home. So I left the after party to get my train, and then once I got home, I saw other YouTubers who were in the exact same place as me, and they had got photos and chatted with Zack Snyder. So I missed out on meeting one of my favorite filmmakers of all time because I had to get a train. I can't tell you how painful that was to see happen. As happy as I was for fellow YouTubers to meet Zack, I was so jealous and so regretted not staying. So if there is a part 3, which I hope there is, and if I manage to be invited again, I will make sure I book a hotel for the night so I don't miss out on potentially meeting Zack Snyder. Even though I didn't meet Zack, the honor of being invited to the premiere, the after party, and meeting and chatting to Stas Nair was more than enough. I'm so grateful for that opportunity and I loved the movie. So I hope you enjoyed my review and I hope you enjoyed my story, and hopefully you enjoy Rebel Moon Part 2 The Scargiver on April 19th. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I hope to see you here again soon, so until then, have a great day. Bye!